delicate girl, until she defeated the toughest soldiers in Second's HFY Sci-Fi best stories in a far-off corner of the galaxy. Nestled among distant planets and uncharted moons, there was a military base unlike any other. It was a place where the toughest soldiers were trained, men and women who had been forged by war and hardened by battles against alien invaders. These soldiers had fought on distant worlds, survived deadly ambushes, and triumphed over threats that no one else dared to face. They were the best of the best, and they had earned their reputation through sheer strength and skill. Among these warriors, there was always a sense of pride. The soldiers here were part of something larger than themselves, a force that protected humanity from the dangers lurking in the vast, cold void of space. They lived for the thrill of the fight, the honor of victory, and the camaraderie that came from sharing life-and-death battles with their fellow soldiers. No one ever questioned the toughness or resolve of the men and women who wore the base's uniform. But one day, everything changed. The military base, known for producing some of the galaxy's fiercest fighters, received a new recruit, a girl. Her name was Alara, and she was unlike anyone the soldiers had ever seen. When she first arrived at the base, it was easy to dismiss her. She was young, delicate-looking, with soft features that seemed out of place in such a tough environment. Alara's frame was slender, and she had a quiet, almost ethereal presence about her that seemed to clash with the rugged, no-nonsense atmosphere of the base. The soldiers had seen many recruits come and go, each one eager to prove themselves, each one confident in their own abilities. But Alara was different. She didn't stand out by boasting about her strength or her skills. In fact, she didn't talk much at all. She was reserved, always keeping to herself. Her long, dark hair was often tied back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the standard military uniform, which seemed almost too large for her small frame. Her presence was calming, almost serene, in contrast to the boisterous, often aggressive nature of the other recruits. At first, the soldiers didn't take much notice of her. She kept to herself during training sessions, doing the bare minimum required of her without ever making a fuss. The seasoned warriors, who had trained for years, couldn't understand why someone so fragile-looking would even want to be here. The base was known for its tough regimen, designed to break down anyone who wasn't strong enough to keep up. And while the other recruits struggled to rise to the challenge, Alara remained composed, never showing signs of exhaustion or frustration. Despite her quiet nature, there was something about her that intrigued the soldiers. They could tell she wasn't just another rookie. There was a quiet confidence in the way she moved, a certain calmness that set her apart from everyone else. It wasn't obvious at first, but there was something deeply unsettling about the way she carried herself. It wasn't weakness or hesitation. It was as if she had a secret, something that no one else could see. As the days went by, the soldiers continued to train, pushing themselves to their limits under the watchful eyes of their commanding officers. Alara, on the other hand, seemed to move through the rigorous routines with effortless grace. She performed every drill with precision, never faltering but never standing out either. It was as if she didn't care about impressing anyone. And yet, the soldiers couldn't shake the feeling that she was holding back, that there was more to her than what met the eye. One morning, the commanding officer, Sergeant Elias, decided it was time to put Alara to the test. He had watched her carefully, observed how she handled herself in the training sessions, and he was curious to see what she was truly capable of. The soldiers had all heard the rumors by now, whispers that Alara was not just a normal recruit, but something else entirely. Some said she had been chosen for her strength. Others believed she had undergone secret training that no one else knew about. But most of the soldiers just thought she was another rookie trying to find her place among them. Sergeant Elias, a towering figure who had seen countless battles, didn't believe in rumors. He believed in results, and Alara's results had been, well, underwhelming. So he called her out in front of the entire squad for a sparring match. "Ilara," he said, his voice booming across the training hall, "come forward. You'll spar with Sergeant Griggs today. Show us what you've got." The other soldiers stopped what they were doing and turned to watch. Sergeant Griggs, a seasoned fighter with a reputation for being nearly unbeatable in hand-to-hand combat, stepped forward with a grin. He was known for his incredible strength and his quick reflexes, and he had taken down many recruits who had underestimated him. Ilara stood calmly, her expression unchanged as she walked toward the center of the room. The soldiers around her exchanged uncertain glances. Griggs was a monster in the ring. If Ilara had any sense at all, she would back down. But Ilara didn't seem worried. She didn't even seem nervous. There was something unnerving about her calmness, as if she knew exactly what was going to happen next. Griggs cracked his knuckles and grinned, clearly looking forward to the fight. "This is going to be easy," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for everyone to hear. Ilara, still silent, took her position, facing him squarely. The crowd fell silent as the two fighters prepared to clash. The sparring match began. At first, everything seemed normal. Griggs charged at Ilara with his usual speed, throwing a series of powerful punches that could easily knock out most opponents. The soldiers expected to see her go down quickly, like everyone else who had challenged Griggs before her. But Ilara was different. She didn't block his punches. She didn't even try to dodge them in the usual way. Instead, with a fluid movement, she stepped aside, as if she had already anticipated Griggs' every move. She moved with such precision and grace that it was hard to keep track of her. In a split second, Ilara was no longer in front of Griggs. She was behind him, her hands at his back, guiding him off balance. Before Griggs could react, Ilara's foot swept beneath his legs, and he fell to the ground with a resounding thud. The crowd gasped in shock. Griggs, stunned by her quickness, scrambled to get back on his feet. He looked at her, eyes wide with disbelief. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to be the one in control, not her. But Ilara didn't give him a chance to recover. With a flick of her wrist, she pinned him to the ground, her body effortlessly controlling his every move. Griggs struggled, but it was clear that he was outmatched. The other soldiers were frozen, unsure of what they were witnessing. Ilara didn't say a word as she held him down. She simply waited, allowing Griggs to realize that he had lost. The match was over. The room remained silent for several long moments, the soldiers too shocked to speak. Sergeant Griggs, now completely humbled, lay on the ground, his pride shattered. And Ilara, the delicate girl who had been written off by everyone, stood above him, unscathed and composed. It was clear now. There was far more to Ilara than anyone could have ever imagined. After the sparring match with Sergeant Griggs, Ilara's name spread like wildfire across the base. The soldiers who had watched in disbelief as she defeated one of their best warriors were now buzzing with a mixture of confusion and awe. How could someone so delicate-looking possess such incredible strength and agility? No one could figure it out. They had seen soldiers fall before, but no one had ever moved with the speed and precision that Ilara had demonstrated. For the next few days, Ilara kept to herself. She trained in silence, just as she always had, but the atmosphere around her had changed. No longer was she just another recruit to be overlooked or dismissed. Now she was a mystery, something no one could explain. The rumors flew fast. Some whispered that she was a secret experiment created in a lab somewhere far away. Others said she had been trained by an ancient alien race, skilled in techniques that could bend time itself. There were even those who believed she was a super soldier, genetically altered to possess abilities beyond human limits. But the truth was far less complicated. Ilara had always been this way. From the moment she was born, she had known something was different about her. Ilara's abilities weren't the result of some outside force, but a genetic gift, a rare anomaly that had been passed down through her family for generations. She didn't just have heightened reflexes or strength. She had the ability to see the world in a way that no one else could. Her brain worked faster than most, processing information in a fraction of a second, allowing her to anticipate movements before they even happened. It wasn't magic or science. It was simply the way she was wired. But despite the curiosity surrounding her, Alara remained silent about her past. She didn't feel the need to explain herself. She wasn't here to impress anyone or prove anything. She had come to this base because it was where she was meant to be, nothing more, nothing less. And yet, the more the soldiers talked about her, the more her presence began to unsettle them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the base settled into a quiet routine, Alara was sitting alone in the training hall. The lights were dim, casting long shadows across the floor. She was doing a set of drills, her movements fluid and precise. Each punch, each kick, was calculated with a level of focus that seemed almost unnatural. The hall was empty, save for the occasional sound of footsteps echoing in the distance. It was then that Sergeant Elias entered. He had been watching her closely for days now, observing her every move. He had been impressed by her performance, but he still didn't fully understand it. He had fought in countless battles, seen soldiers with extraordinary abilities, but he had never encountered anyone like Alara. He had been the one to call her out for the sparring match, and now he felt that he needed to know more. "Training late tonight, Alara?" he asked, his voice low but carrying across the quiet room. Alara didn't look up at him. She simply nodded and continued her routine, moving through the drills with effortless grace. She had already noticed his presence, but she didn't feel the need to acknowledge him. He was just another person who didn't understand her, just like everyone else. Elias stood by the doorway for a moment, watching her, trying to gauge her reaction. He had seen recruits come and go, but none of them had ever behaved like this. Most soldiers were driven by pride, by the need to prove themselves. But Alara didn't seem interested in any of that. She didn't care about recognition, fame, or even respect. She simply moved through life as though it were a series of steps to be followed, each one precise and calculated. Finally, he couldn't stand the silence any longer. "You know," he said, walking into the room, "most recruits would be celebrating after a victory like that. They'd want to show off, tell everyone about the fight. But not you." Alara paused mid-motion, her eyes still focused on the training dummy in front of her. She didn't respond right away, and Elias could sense that she wasn't interested in engaging in a conversation. But he pressed on. "Why?" he asked, his voice a bit more insistent now. "Why do you do this? Why do you act like this place doesn't matter to you?" Alara finally lowered her hands and turned to face him. Her expression remained neutral, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something that made Elias stop in his tracks. It wasn't anger or irritation, but a calm understanding, as if she could see right through him. "I don't need to prove anything to anyone," she said softly. Her voice was steady, without the slightest trace of doubt. "I'm here to learn, not to compete." Elias couldn't help but feel a twinge of respect. Most soldiers came to this base with one goal: to become the best, to claim a position of power and prestige. But Alara wasn't like the others. She didn't care about that. It wasn't about winning or losing for her. It was about something deeper, something more personal. "I don't get it," Elias admitted, his brow furrowed. "You're not like anyone I've ever met. You're different. You defeated Griggs without even trying, and yet you act like it means nothing to you. Why don't you want to be recognized for your skills, for what you've done?" Alara met his gaze, her eyes calm but firm. "Because I don't need recognition. I don't need to be seen as special. What I do is just what I am." Elias stood there for a moment, lost for words. There was something about her that was so simple, yet so deeply profound. He had always been driven by the desire to be the best, to lead and to be recognized for his accomplishments. But Alara, she didn't care about any of that, and it made him realize just how much he had let those things control his life. Before he could respond, Alara turned back to the training dummy and began her drills again, the fluid motions of her body never faltering. It was clear that the conversation was over, and she was ready to move on. Elias watched her for a long moment, feeling a mix of admiration and confusion. He had seen many soldiers with remarkable abilities, but none of them had ever possessed the quiet strength that Alara had. She was a mystery, an enigma wrapped in a fragile, delicate body. And yet, beneath that delicate exterior, she was more powerful than anything he had ever encountered. As he left the training hall that night, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that Alara wasn't just a soldier. She was something else entirely. Something that couldn't be explained by simple strength or skill. She was a force of nature, and he had no idea how to begin understanding her. As the days turned into weeks, the base grew more accustomed to Alara's quiet presence. She no longer seemed like an outsider, even though she never fully integrated into the everyday activities that consumed the other soldiers. Instead, Alara kept to herself, maintaining a low profile, but her reputation had grown to almost mythical proportions. Soldiers who had been present during the sparring match against Sergeant Griggs spoke of it in hushed tones, recounting how a girl, no older than 20, had taken down the base's best fighter in mere seconds. Many of the recruits were now eager to test themselves against her. They wanted to prove they were tougher, faster, stronger. They saw it as a challenge, a way to gain respect in the eyes of the others. But Alara showed no interest in proving anything. She trained silently, focused entirely on her own progress. She didn't look for validation from anyone, and it was that lack of ego, that quiet humility, that made her even more impressive. At night, when the base was quiet and the soldiers retired to their quarters, Alara would often be found sitting alone in the mess hall or in one of the training rooms. She was always moving, always improving, but never drawing attention to herself. It was clear that something inside her was constantly driving her to be better, to perfect her skills. No one knew where this drive came from, least of all Alara herself. She had always been this way, ever since she could remember. She had learned early in life that being the best didn't mean outshining others. It meant constantly striving to improve, to learn, and to push past your limits. It was this dedication that caught the attention of Captain Riker, the commanding officer of the base. Captain Riker had seen soldiers with immense talent, but he had never encountered anyone quite like Alara. He had heard the stories, of course, the rumors of how she had dispatched Sergeant Griggs with ease, but he needed to see it for himself. Riker was a man who didn't believe in legends. He believed in results, and Alara's results, as far as he was concerned, were beyond impressive. One morning, after the sun had barely risen, Riker approached Alara in the training hall. She was already there, as usual, practicing her drills with quiet precision. She was alone, her eyes focused on the movements of her hands and feet, her body flowing effortlessly through the motions. As he watched her from the doorway, Riker couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. It wasn't just the speed or strength that she displayed, it was the fluidity, the way her body seemed to move in perfect harmony with the environment around her. It was as if she was one with the very air itself. "Impressive," Riker said, stepping into the room. Alara didn't stop. She didn't acknowledge his presence, but she didn't need to. She was used to being observed. In her world, the only approval she sought was her own. Still, she knew that the captain was there for a reason. He wasn't one to simply watch without purpose. Riker stood there for a moment, studying her. "I've seen a lot of soldiers over the years," he began, his voice calm but firm, "and I've watched them all strive for greatness in one way or another. But what you do, it's different. It's something I've never seen before." Alara continued her drills, her movements steady and controlled. "I'm just training," she said quietly, her voice almost lost in the stillness of the room. Riker raised an eyebrow. "Training? You make it look effortless, like you've already mastered it." Alara paused briefly, lowering her arms. She turned to face him, her expression as calm as ever. "Mastery isn't about perfection," she replied, her voice steady and sure. "It's about progression. You keep moving forward, keep learning, and never stop trying to improve." Riker regarded her for a moment, impressed by her words as much as her actions. There was no arrogance in her tone, no boastfulness, only a quiet confidence that was as much a part of her as her skill. It was clear to him that she wasn't driven by ego or pride. She was driven by something else entirely. "I've been watching you for a while now," Riker said, his gaze sharp. "You've never once asked for recognition. You've never sought out the limelight. And yet you're the most skilled person I've seen on this base. How do you do it?" Alara met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "I don't do it for anyone else," she said simply. "I do it because it's what I'm meant to do. And because, in the end, it's the only thing that matters to me." Riker thought about her words for a long moment. He had been a soldier for most of his life, and he understood the desire for recognition. He had known many soldiers who lived for the respect of their peers, who fought for glory and prestige. But Alara was different. She didn't care about any of that. She didn't need validation. She was content with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she was always improving, always moving forward. "I want you to come with me," Riker said, breaking the silence. "There's a mission coming up, something that requires a different kind of skill. I need someone who doesn't just follow orders, someone who can think on their feet and make decisions in the heat of battle. I want you on this mission." Alara considered his words carefully. She had no interest in the spotlight, no desire for fame or glory. But there was something in Riker's tone that made her pause. She could sense that this mission was important, not just for the base, but for something greater. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her. "I'm not a soldier," Alara said, her voice thoughtful. "I'm not here to fight." Riker nodded as if he had expected this response. "I know, but I've seen what you're capable of, and I think you have more to offer than you realize. This mission, it's not just about fighting. It's about strategy, about thinking beyond what's immediately in front of you, and I believe you're the perfect person for it." Alara didn't respond right away. She had never been one to rush into decisions, but she could see that this wasn't an ordinary mission. It wasn't about personal glory or recognition. It was about something more important, something that could make a real difference. Finally, after a long pause, she nodded. "I'll do it." Riker smiled, a rare moment of approval passing across his face. "Good, I knew you would. We leave in 2 days, be ready." As he left the training hall, Alara returned to her drills, but now there was a new purpose behind her movements. She had never sought the attention or recognition of others, but this mission, whatever it was, had awakened something within her. She wasn't just training for herself anymore. She was preparing for something much bigger, something that would require everything she had. For the first time since she had arrived at the base, Alara felt a sense of purpose beyond her own progress. She wasn't sure what the mission would bring, but she knew that it was her next step, and she would be ready for it. In Part 3, the focus shifts toward Alara's internal growth and the recognition of her abilities, as well as her acceptance of the mission that will take her beyond the confines of the base. The tension builds as she takes on new challenges, driven not by fame or glory but by an inner purpose. Let me know how you'd like to proceed. The days leading up to the mission were filled with preparations. Alara could sense the change in the air. There was an urgency now, something that hadn't been present before. The base was always busy, always moving, but there was a new intensity to the activities. Soldiers moved with purpose, their conversations brief and to the point, focused on the task ahead. Even the officers seemed more serious, their usual lightheartedness replaced by a sharp, almost palpable tension. As the time drew nearer, Alara spent every moment she could training. She worked with the soldiers who would be accompanying her on the mission, learning their skills and ways of thinking, trying to anticipate what kind of situation she might face. While the others prepared in their own way, checking equipment, reviewing tactics, going over plans, Alara focused on herself. She was already in peak physical condition, but she needed to refine her instincts to make sure that every decision she made would be as sharp as possible. Captain Riker had told her that this mission would require more than just fighting. It would be a test of her ability to think on her feet, to make decisions with limited information, and to act quickly in the face of uncertainty. Alara wasn't sure what exactly they would face. Riker had only said it was something critical, but the nature of the mission was classified. It didn't matter. She would be ready. The night before they were set to leave, Alara stood alone in the mess hall. The hum of quiet conversation surrounded her, but she was distant, lost in her thoughts. She had always been an outsider, someone who didn't seek companionship or validation. She had learned to rely only on herself. Yet now, as the mission loomed, something shifted. For the first time, she found herself wondering if the others would see her as more than just the quiet girl with the extraordinary abilities. Would they trust her in a real battle? Would they follow her lead? She had no answer. "Mind if I join you?" The voice broke through her thoughts. Alara turned to see Sergeant Griggs standing at the entrance, a plate of food in his hands. His usual confidence was absent. He looked almost uncertain. "Of course," Alara replied, her voice steady as always, though the surprise at his presence lingered in her mind. Griggs had never really spoken to her much after their sparring match, and she had always kept her distance. He had been one of the soldiers who had initially dismissed her, who had laughed at the idea of a delicate girl being anything more than an average recruit. Yet here he was, sitting across from her, his posture more relaxed than it had ever been. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound in the room was the quiet clink of utensils on plates. Griggs finally broke the silence, his voice low but sincere. "I want to apologize," he said, looking down at his food. "I never should have underestimated you. That fight. It wasn't just a win. It was a statement. You're something else, Alara. I don't think anyone on this base really understands who you are." Alara didn't respond immediately. She wasn't used to apologies, especially from someone like Griggs. She had expected him to brush it off, to laugh it off, but instead he seemed genuine. She could see the change in him, the respect, the acknowledgement of her abilities. It was more than just recognition of her skill. It was an understanding that Alara was not to be underestimated, not anymore. "I don't need an apology," Alara said finally, her voice soft but firm. "I never fought to prove anything to you. I fight to improve, that's all." Griggs nodded, the weight of her words settling between them. There was no need for any more explanation. They both understood now. There was no need to speak further. The rest of the evening passed in quiet reflection. Alara had never been one for casual conversation, and neither had Griggs. But something unspoken had passed between them, a mutual respect that had grown out of their brief interaction. It wasn't about their differences or their past misunderstandings. It was about what lay ahead. Alara didn't know what the mission would bring, but she knew one thing. She would have to rely on those around her, just as much as they would have to rely on her. The next morning, the team assembled outside the base, ready for departure. The air was cold, the sky still dark as the first hints of dawn crept over the horizon. Alara stood with the others, her face calm and composed, her mind focused on the mission. She glanced around at the soldiers, the faces she had worked alongside for the past few weeks. There was no fear in their eyes, only determination. This wasn't a training exercise, this was real. Captain Riker stood at the front, his face serious. "Listen up," he said, his voice carrying across the group. "This mission isn't like any we've done before. We're heading into hostile territory. We don't know exactly what we'll face, but we're prepared for anything. Stay sharp, stay focused, and remember, our success depends on all of us working together. Alara, you're in charge of the strategy. I'm relying on you." Alara didn't flinch at his words. It wasn't a surprise. Riker had been clear from the beginning that he trusted her judgment, and now she would have to prove it. She looked around at the soldiers, all of them ready for whatever came next. She wasn't the leader they might have expected, but she was the one who had been chosen for this mission, and she would not let them down. The transport ship that would take them to their destination was sleek and fast, designed for covert operations. The inside was minimal, nothing more than the essential equipment and a few seats. The soldiers took their places, strapping themselves in as the engines roared to life. The ship shot off from the base, cutting through the sky as they made their way to the unknown. As they traveled, Alara reviewed the mission details once more. The target was a heavily fortified facility, located on a distant moon in a region controlled by a hostile alien faction. The facility was believed to be the site of illegal weapons development, research that could tip the balance of power in the galaxy. Alara's task was simple: infiltrate the facility, gather intelligence, and neutralize any threats. But the simple part was just a cover. The truth was, no one knew exactly what kind of weapons the aliens were working on or how many defenders they would face. It was a high-risk mission, and failure wasn't an option. Alara turned to Griggs, who was sitting across from her. He met her gaze, and for a moment there was a shared understanding between them. They were all in this together. The mission had begun, and nothing would stop them now. The transport ship descended through the atmosphere of the moon, its engines humming as it approached the landing zone. As they touched down, Alara stood and gave the team one final look. She could feel the weight of the mission bearing down on her. There was no turning back now. As the hatch opened and the cold, alien landscape spread out before them, Alara felt something shift inside her. She wasn't just here to learn or to test herself anymore. She was here for something much bigger. She was here to make a difference. The team filed out of the ship, moving quickly and quietly into the shadows. Alara led the way, her every step calculated, her mind working at lightning speed as she assessed their surroundings. The mission had begun. The cold wind blew across the barren moon, and the air smelled of dust and metal. Alara led the team through the rocky landscape, her eyes scanning the surroundings. The alien facility was just ahead, hidden in a small valley between jagged cliffs. The path to it was treacherous, but Alara's mind was focused, her every move calculated. She had done this countless times in simulations, but this was real. There was no room for error. The team moved in silence, their footsteps muffled by the ground beneath them. Alara, Griggs, and the others were equipped with the latest stealth gear, designed to make them almost invisible to the naked eye. The plan was simple: infiltrate the facility, gather intelligence, and neutralize any threats. But Alara knew better than anyone that plans rarely went as expected. The real test would come when things inevitably went wrong. They reached the perimeter of the facility without incident. The guards were few, but well armed. Alara's team had been briefed on their patrol routes, and they knew when to strike and when to stay hidden. As they moved toward the outer walls of the compound, Alara signaled for them to stop. She knelt down, adjusting the small device on her wrist. A map of the facility appeared on the screen, showing the layout of the building and the locations of the security cameras. "Two guards at the main entrance," Alara whispered, her voice barely audible. "We'll take the side entrance. Griggs, you and Turner move ahead. Stay low." Griggs nodded, and he and the other soldier, Turner, slipped into the shadows, disappearing from sight. Alara, with the rest of the team, followed at a distance. They had trained for moments like this. They had studied every possible scenario. And yet, Alara couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The air felt thick, tense, as if the very atmosphere was warning her of something. They reached the side entrance, a narrow door hidden behind a series of metal crates. Alara signaled for everyone to halt as she carefully checked the door. It was locked, But that was nothing she couldn't handle. She quickly accessed the security panel and disabled the lock, then silently pushed the door open. Inside, the facility was cold and sterile, the walls lined with rows of equipment and machinery. The lighting was dim, casting long shadows across the floors. Alara led the team down the hallway, her footsteps soft but quick. The sound of their breathing was the only thing that broke the silence. They moved with purpose, each soldier knowing their role, each step bringing them closer to their objective. As they moved deeper into the facility, Alara's thoughts remained focused on the mission. They had to gather intel, find out what kind of weapons the aliens were developing, and if possible, disable them. But Alara couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something more was at play here. The mission was too easy so far, too quiet. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Alara's instincts kicked in. She gestured for the team to hide behind the nearest set of crates. They crouched low, their bodies pressed against the cool walls. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Alara's heart raced, but she remained calm. She had faced worse situations before. This was just another test, another obstacle to overcome. The footsteps stopped just outside their hiding place. Alara held her breath, her hand on the gun at her side, ready to move at a moment's notice. But the moment stretched on and nothing happened. The guard outside didn't move, didn't speak. It was as if he was waiting for something. Alara's mind raced as she tried to think through every possibility. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps faded, and the guard moved away. Alara let out a quiet breath, signaling to her team that it was safe to move. They continued down the hallway, but now Alara's mind was on high alert. Something was wrong. She couldn't put her finger on it, but the tension in the air had changed. It wasn't just a mission anymore. It was a trap. They reached the room they were looking for, a large, sterile chamber lined with computers and storage tanks. This was it, the heart of the facility. Alara stepped forward, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. The team quickly set to work, gathering data and disabling the equipment. But Alara's focus remained elsewhere. She kept glancing toward the door, her senses tingling with unease. "Something's off," she murmured under her breath, more to herself than to anyone else. "Don't worry," Griggs replied quietly, his voice calm but with a hint of tension. "We're almost done here, just a few more minutes." But Alara couldn't shake the feeling. Her mind worked faster than ever, processing every sound, every movement in the room. And then it happened. The lights in the room flickered once, then went out completely. Darkness engulfed them. Alara's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment everything was still. Then, without warning, alarms blared to life, piercing the silence with an ear-splitting wail. Red lights flashed around the room, casting an eerie glow across the faces of the team. "We've been compromised," Riker shouted over the noise. "Move out now." Alara's heart skipped a beat. It had happened. The trap had been sprung. "Stay close," Alara ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. She turned to lead the team back toward the exit, but the hallway outside was no longer empty. Alien soldiers, heavily armed and wearing combat suits, rushed toward them from both sides. The team's movements became frantic as they tried to fight their way out. Alara's mind raced, analyzing the situation in real time, calculating every possible outcome. Griggs fired first, his weapon roaring as it took down two of the alien soldiers. Turner followed, covering their backs as the rest of the team moved toward the exit. Alara was at the front, leading the charge, her mind clear despite the growing danger. She had faced worse situations before, but this was different. This time it wasn't just about survival, it was about completing the mission. They fought their way down the hallway, every step a battle. Alara's mind worked at lightning speed, assessing threats, giving orders, and ensuring the team stayed together. The aliens were relentless, but they were disorganized. They had been caught off guard, just as Alara had suspected. This was a setup, but it wasn't going to stop them. As they neared the exit, Alara's team was down to just 5 soldiers. Griggs and Turner were with her, but several others had fallen in the firefight. They were close, so close, but the aliens were closing in. Alara knew they couldn't afford to lose anyone else. "We make it out together," Alara said, her voice steady and unwavering. She was leading them now, and they would follow her. On my signal. The team moved in unison, weapons raised, prepared for the final push. Alara signaled, and they burst out of the facility into the cold moonlight. The transport ship was waiting for them, engines roaring to life as they sprinted toward it. But the aliens were not far behind. They fired as the team made their escape, the blaster shots narrowly missing Alara as she dove into the ship. The hatch closed and the ship blasted off, leaving the facility behind. Alara looked out the window, her heart still racing. They had made it. The mission was a success, but at a cost. The aliens might have been caught off guard, but they would learn from this. And next time, Alara would be ready. As the ship soared through the stars, Alara looked around at the surviving members of her team. They were battered, bruised, but alive, and they had completed the mission. Alara felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. It wasn't about the victory. It was about knowing that, no matter what came next, she was ready.